Hello everyone and welcome to another video. When a ride breaks down there's always a mechanic to fix it, and when a guest pukes in the middle of the path there will be a handyman to clean it up. But what if they weren't there? What if you were not allowed to have or hire any staff at all? Can you still beat the game when the rides never get fixed and puke never gets swiped up? The quick answer is yes, because it's relatively easy to just do those jobs yourself. If a ride breaks down you can just delete and rebuild it, and you can do the same with path pieces that have puke or litter on it. Sure, it can become a bit tedious, but it's not that difficult. Okay, so what if you're not allowed to do that? Anything you would do to mimic the job of a staff member is now not allowed. That gives us the following rules. Number 1. Fire any staff member present at the start and never hire any new ones. Number 2. You are not allowed to delete broken down rides. Number 3. You are actually not allowed to delete rides at all, as deleting rides and building new ones makes the reliability go up, which mimics ride inspections. Number 4. You are not allowed to delete path that has puke or litter on it. Number 5. You are not allowed to delete any litter bins, as that mimics handyman emptying them. And lastly, number 6. You are not allowed to replace any vandalized path items, as preventing vandalism is the job of the security guard. The happiness boost of the entertainer isn't something you can manually do, so there's no rule associated with it, but we are still definitely going to feel its absence. Just like for my video where I tried to beat the game without building any path, I thought it would be nice to go back to basics and actually play this in the original RollerCoaster Tycoon 1. Doing all 81 scenarios in this game is a bit much, so I'm going to just play the original 21 scenarios from the base game. The first one is Forest Frontiers, and let's just see what happens if we try to build a normal park but without staff. We'll start with the merry-go-round and the spiral slide, and then I'll do my best attempt at some nice scenery with these giraffes and fountains. Then it's time for a simple roller coaster to also appease the more thrill-seeking guests. Since we do not have the ability to empty or replace litter bins, I'm going to spam them on every single path piece so that guests can throw their food and drink litter into a bin for as long as possible. I tried to make the park look a bit nicer by putting a Ferris wheel on a hill, but I completely forgot that unlike RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, RCT1 does actually give you the mountain tool, so doing this all corner by corner was not necessary. While building this hill, the merry-go-round breaks down, which is rather early, but it is what it is, so I'll put a new one behind it and let the old one be. Then the steel mini coaster also breaks down, so I built another roller coaster as well. This is honestly not great. It's only May and we've already lost 2 rides, and the park rating isn't doing great due to a growing amount of puke on the path, because guests cannot puke in litter bins. This also leads to vandalism, and during the first run I did replace some vandalized bins as I hadn't thought of rule 6 yet, but I will not do this in any other run. I had some fun building some more scenery, but while I was doing this it was pretty clear that this wasn't working. The guest count is perfectly fine and we are well over the 250 guests that we need, but the park rating is dwindling. My final act is building a nice big wooden coaster because I wanted to, but after that, in July, it is clear this is never going to work. Thanks to a ton of puke and as a result also unhappy guests, the park rating has gone down to just 420, well below the required 600, and it will never go up again. This was a fail, but that was expected as I just played normally to see what would happen. I think the rides breaking down isn't a very big issue as we can just build new ones, but the puke obviously is. We could try to only build rides with a nausea rating very close to 0 so that guests don't get sick at all, but I have a better idea. Guests cannot puke or litter on underground paths and also not on sloped paths. If we just build all the paths underground or make them sloped, then we can't get any puke or litter. They can still perform the action, so the thrash will still disappear from the guest's inventory and they will still have the nausea reduction from throwing up, but nothing will actually appear on the ground. Before we try this all out in our next attempt, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Surfshark VPN. A VPN allows you to hide from your internet service provider what website you have been visiting, which is very useful for me as I regularly do all kinds of very ethically questionable experiments on the guests in this game, and I would like to keep that a secret. A more real thing it's been helping me with was watching the Dutch Olympics broadcast when I was at the actual Olympics in Milan. It is geo-blocked if you're not in the Netherlands, but with Surfshark I could make the site believe I was in the Netherlands anyway. In addition, I was able to easily install it for my parents as well when they went to France during the Football World Cup, because Surfshark can be installed on an unlimited number of devices with just one account. There's also a feature called Surfshark Alert, which can do things like notify you when your data has been leaked somewhere, allowing you to take action like changing your password. It's such a good product that even my brother's cat Atsuki decided to start using it, and she's a cat. To get Surfshark yourself, go to surfshark.com/MarcelVos or use code MarcelVos at checkout to get 4 extra months for free. With the strategy figured out and the bills paid, it's now time to do our first serious attempt at Forest Frontiers. After deleting the bit of path that we start out with, we go underground and again build a merry-go-round. The fun part of having the path underground is that you can really build rides wherever, which makes for a very odd looking park. The roller coaster is completely in the way of everything, but it also isn't because there is nothing to be in the way of above ground. It's going quite well, and in May, while working on another hill, this time with the mountain tool, we hit the goal of 250 guests and 600 park rating. But we're not there yet, as the deadline is not now, but rather at the end of the year. The hill I'm building is going to be a massive Ferris wheel hill, and there's a very good reason for this. I think it's cool. We already have enough guests, so we might as well just build some fun stuff. The wheels are gonna be alternating red and white, and the entrance and exit paths will nicely match that theme. And so will the ground and terrain edges, although I do think this roof terrain is a bit ugly, but who cares? This game is all about doing what you like, and currently I want to do this. I also want a wooden coaster again, and this one's going to be much bigger than the first one. It's definitely going to make quite a few guests puke, but that doesn't matter because it cannot appear anywhere. Stalls cannot be built underground since the shift key functionality doesn't exist yet in this game, so to build stalls we need to make a hole in the land and build them in there. It's not a big deal, it just makes them a little bit more expensive to build. At this point I get the idea to build a fence around Ferris Wheel Hill, and this improves the look a lot. I think I dare even say it looks quite nice now. Okay, that's enough fun, let's get back to what we're here for. It is August and our park rating is still high and we have over 600 guests, so things are looking good. However, in September I spot something I thought to be impossible. There is puke on the sloped paths. This is not how I know the game to work, so I was really baffled by this. Maybe it changed between RCT 1 and 2, but no, they also do it in RCT 2. The truth is that OpenRCT2, which I have been using for about 10 years now, has a bug where they cannot puke on sloped paths, but that was never the case in the original games. So every time I have told you this fact, I wasn't necessarily wrong, but it was a bug. No longer though, as I have fixed this for OpenRCT2, and if you're using the development version you will already have this fix. If you only use big releases, then you will get this fix whenever version 0.5.4 releases. I'm not sure this is going to be a big problem though, as even though there is some puke on the sloped bits, it's not very much. We do have another problem that is more significant, and that is that guests are stuck on broken down rides. The merry-go-round broke down in April, and the 16 guests that were on it then are still stuck on it and are now super unhappy. That's fine if it's just going to be a few guests, sucks for them but not a big deal for us, but it's going to be more and more and more over time. The twist has another 12 guests stuck on it, and the 3 broken down Ferris wheels have 72 guests on them combined. You may think we can just double close them, as usually that removes all the trains and all the guests from the ride, but you cannot double close a broken down ride, so they really are on there forever until the end of time. Only a mechanic or a ride deletion can save them, and both of those are forbidden. As October marches on and the deadline nears, our park rating is going down steadily as more and more rides start to break down. The question is, will October end before the rating drops below 600? Unfortunately, it does not, and roughly 1 minute before the deadline hits, the park rating hits 593, sealing the losing fate of our second attempt. We can save this though. I reloaded the checkpoint I made in early October and started spamming tiny mazes. These are not for guests to ride, and they are not going to make anyone less unhappy, but they will increase the park rating in 2 other ways. You can get up to 200 park rating points from the average uptime of your ride, and spamming new rides with 100% uptime will counteract all the rides that have been broken down for a while, increasing the rating a bit. They also contribute to the up to 200 points you can get from the total ride excitement and intensity in the park, and I hope that both of these factors combined are enough to save the park rating. The margin is still slim, but this time we do beat Forest Frontiers with a park rating of 631, proving that you can indeed beat it without any staff. Just 20 more scenarios to go. Next up is Dynamite Dunes, with a deadline that is thrice as far away, with October Year 3 and the guest requirement of 650. We did already get those 650 guests in our Forest Frontiers in just 1 year, but as we've seen, here it's all about keeping the park rating up, and now we need to do that for 3 times as long. There is some path pre-built that is above the ground, so the first thing we need to do is get rid of that before it gets puked on and replace it with an underground path. After that I started building rides, but this time I made sure absolutely no normal path was above ground. I also gave the roller coasters much shorter trains so that hopefully only a small amount of guests would get stuck on them when they broke down. This was all a reasonable attempt, but I quickly found out that it just really wasn't going to work. On July 14th, both the wooden coaster and steel mini coaster broke down on exactly the same day, and that after the mine train coaster, twist and merry-go-round were already broken. We're only 20% of the time to the goal, so we're just going to end up with a massive graveyard of broken down rides with lots of guests stuck on them. This isn't going to work. What we need is a proper real strategy. So, for the second attempt I again removed the path that was already there and also expelled all the guests. Then I raised some land to build a path inside so that our underground path was still at the level of the terrain around it. And then we wait. It doesn't take that long to get 650 guests, so why would we start building our park in year 1 when we can also just wait 2 years and essentially change the 3-year deadline into a 1-year deadline? That way we're going to have way less trouble with rides breaking down and such. When March of year 3 has arrived, we start building some spiral slides. Well, not just some, but rather a lot. There are some ride types that cannot break down, which would be ideal for this, but you don't get any of them in Dynamite Dunes. The next best option is, I think, the spiral slide, because it's tiny and if it breaks down it will not have any guests stuck on it. And now it's just a question of building more and more slides and hoping we reach the goal of 650 guests in time. We will easily have enough guests walk through the park gate, but half the guests will spawn with an intensity preference of 4 or more, and the spiral slide is too boring for them, so they will leave pretty quickly. After a few months it's clear to me that it's gonna be pretty tight. At the start of August, with 3 months to go, we have 360 guests in the park, meaning we need to get about 97 more guests per month. We start September with 459 guests, meaning we got 99 extra guests in August, so technically we're slightly ahead of schedule. September wasn't quite as good though, and we only got 89 guests, bringing us to 548 with 1 month and 102 guests to go. Halfway October we still haven't reached 600, so I'm going to do something radical and place a no entry sign in front of the park entrance, trapping everyone inside. This will completely kill your park rating, as guests that are trying to leave will become lost, but that takes a little while to happen, so I think we can weather these 2 weeks. Our rating is also quite high with nearly 900, so we can lose some and still stay above the required 600. And this strategy works, as 2 weeks later, at the end of year 3, we have 721 guests and 856 park rating, allowing us to handily beat Dynamite Dunes. It is at this point that guests are starting to become lost, and only a week later the rating drops down all the way to 583, so we timed it well. We could have used some advertising campaigns instead of a no entry sign to get more guests, but I would like to see how many of these scenarios we can beat with also no advertising, just as a fun extra challenge. Okay, that's 2 scenarios down, and now it's time for Leafy Lake. In this one we do start with the ride that cannot break down, the rowing boats. We should just be able to spam a ton of these and get enough guests without any issues. And so we start filling the lake with over 50 tiny boat hires, which will easily be enough to attract the 500 guests we need for the goal. And since we don't need to worry about rides breaking down, we also don't need to wait until the 3rd year to start. As it's just a boat hire, I don't think we'll get any puke, so the paths can just be above ground. We do still need to think about litter though, but the ice cream food stall is great as it generates no trash. Unfortunately, all drink stalls do generate trash, so guests will have to do without. And that's it, the setup is done, so now we can just sit back, relax and use Cheat Engine to fast forward until the deadline. Except, of course, it's not that simple, as I underestimated the seasickness of some of the guests, and even the very low 0.7 nausea rating of these boat hires is still enough to make some guests, whose stomachs are apparently weaker than a level 1 Magikarp, puke their brains out. At first I thought it maybe wouldn't be too bad, but it quickly becomes apparent that it will be bad, and around May year 2 the park rating dropped below 600. Okay, reload to the point where the boat hires were built, get all the guests out, delete the path, raise the land and rebuild the path. This is quite a bit of work as I have to do it one tile at a time, but it will guarantee a grand total amount of 0 puke. This time we can actually relax and sit back as the guests are flowing in. The super low 0.2 intensity means that not just the 50% of the guests who have an intensity preference of 4 or more will never go on a ride, but it's also gonna be the 12.5% who start with between 3 and 6. And the next level down, the 12.5% of the guests that spawn with between 2 and 5 will have to be quite happy to ride one of the boat hires, and guests don't spawn that happy in Leafy Lake. That means that only 25% of the guests, the ones that spawn with an intensity preference of between 1 and 4 and the ones with less than 3, will stick around. As a result, the guest count increases quite slowly, but that's fine as 500 guests in 3 years really isn't very much. In July year 2 we passed 500 guests and we're only just past the halfway point to the deadline. When the deadline approaches in October year 3 we have over 1200 guests and a park rating of over 900, allowing us to easily beat Leafy Lake. Diamond Height is gonna be a lot easier since it's a park value goal. We need to get 20,000 park value at the end of year 3, which can easily be achieved by spamming a bunch of shuttle loops. We do first need to fire the few mechanics and handymen that are already there, but then we can start building our rows of identical unreachable roller coasters. With 18 of these built we are at 46,000 park value, which should be enough to get us there. And now we again just sit back, relax and enjoy the show. The park value slowly decreases as rides are breaking down and guests aren't riding them anymore, but eventually it settles down in the 43,000s. Then, at the start of August, it suddenly falls to just 32,000 as all the shuttle loops have moved on to the next age bracket and have lost some value. They are also breaking down one by one, but that's fine as a broken down ride still provides the same amount of park value. A year later, in August year 2, their value drops again and we go down to just 25,000 park value, but that's still above the goal of 20,000. This is the final drop that happens before the deadline, so we will comfortably beat Diamond Heights. The park is a total mess though, there's a lot of puke on the ground, everything is vandalized, over 130 guests are trapped on the ride and only a single ride is still operating. But that doesn't matter, the park rating may be 0, but the park value is still high enough to celebrate a victory. The 5th scenario is Evergreen Gardens, which requires 1,000 guests in 4 years. Since this time we have the maze available at the start, I just want to spam as many of them as possible. There will also be a number of ice cream stalls, toilets and info kiosks, but all the other ride slots will be filled by mazes and nothing but mazes. The nice thing about the maze is that it always has a nausea rating of 0.00, making it impossible for any guest to puke, so we will not have to bother with putting our paths underground. And of course they cannot break down, which is the main reason they're great for this challenge. They do suffer the same downside as the boat hire with a very low intensity rating of just 0.5, but since we got over 1200 guests in the 3 years of Leafy Lake with boat hires, the goal of 1,000 guests in 4 years with mazes shouldn't be a problem. So there I am, happily placing more and more mazes, wondering when I'm going to hit the ride limit of 255. We're already past maze number 200 and there's also a bunch of stalls, so it cannot be far away now. And then the game crashed. I expected a pop-up saying you hit the limit like you get in RCT2, but in the first game it apparently just crashes and I hadn't saved yet. 30 minutes later we're back with a slightly different layout but the same amount of mazes, and this time I made sure to stop at exactly 255 total rides. And then it's speed up time again. At the end of year 1 we already have nearly 500 guests, so it's going quite well. The second year is a bit slower, but we do have more than 800 guests in the park at the end of it, meaning we only need to get 200 more in the next 2 years. We don't need to wait that long though, and in August of year 3 we hit the big 1000, now we only need to maintain it. And that's easy enough, as at the end of year 4 we have nearly 1400 guests in the park, allowing us to also complete Evergreen Gardens. To show how few guests that enter the park are actually staying around, we can look at the guest number of the newest guest, which is over 6,000. That did make us incredibly rich though, with roughly €250,000 in the bank. We've now had what I kind of consider the set of tutorial scenarios of the game that starts with Forest Frontiers and ends with a big 4-year goal in Evergreen Gardens, and up next is Bumbly Beach with a goal of 750 guests in 2 years. Here you start with a bunch of rides that I'm immediately going to close to prevent puke. As per my own rules, I cannot remove them, but I can still close them. Then I'm going to build a bunch of monorails, including one in the middle that I can very easily replace with a new one next to it when it breaks down. And then, once it's been researched, it's maze time again. While building these, something interesting happened. If you have a lot of windows open, then sometimes the maze construction window doesn't close and you can immediately build another one of this saved design. This doesn't even result in any glitched rides or anything, it just builds another one. It's a weird effect, but it also saves me some effort, which is nice. The purpose of the monorails is to also keep guests with higher intensity preferences around. The monorail also has a super low intensity, but in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2, guests will always go on a free transport ride, and once guests have ridden at least one ride, they will stay around for much longer. I assumed this would work the same in RCT1, and this playthrough convinced me that that was true. After I was done with the setup, I fast forwarded and the guest count steadily rose to about 800, before completely stagnating after the final still operating monorail broke down and I didn't replace it. It's gonna be a bit of a tight squeeze, but at the end of year 2 we do have about 24 more guests than required, so we do beat it. Trinity Islands also has a guest goal of 750, but this time you have 3 years. I decided to just do the exact same strategy and make use of the paths that are already built for you. There's gonna be a whole bunch of mazes around the park and a few monorails to keep the more thrill-seeking guests around. However, this time, when all the monorails had been broken down and I couldn't be bothered to build new ones, the guest count kept steadily rising as if the monorails had no effect at all. This made me doubt my earlier assumptions, and a quick test shows that indeed it's not true. Here on the left you can see a guest with a preference of more than 4 intensity refusing to ride this free monorail in RollerCoaster Tycoon 1. But in the same setup in RCT2 on the right, they do ride it. This change was made in RCT2 probably to allow guests to not get stuck in places only accessible by transport rides, such as this bit on the mountain in Rainbow Summit. That means that the monorails were entirely useless, but that's okay as we still beat Trinity Islands with over 1100 guests. After this come 2 more park value scenarios, Katie's Dreamland and Puke Park. I know it says Katie's World and Dinky Park here, but that's because I have the American version of RCT1, which has had some names changed. In this video I will use the original UK names of the scenarios though. Katie requires us to get a value of 15,000 after 3 years, which is easily done with some junior coasters and the much easier to spam pirate ship. Like with Diamond Heights, the park itself is absolutely gone to hell by the time we reach the deadline, but that's completely fine as the value of all these broken down rides is still over 15,000. Puke Park is much the same, except this time I'm using the observation tower. There's no real reason for this other than that I like some variety in the rides that I'm using. I could also have waited until just before the deadline with building these, as then they would still have all their value at the deadline, so I wouldn't need to build as many, but it's not a big effort either way, so it doesn't really matter. At the end of year 2, we still have more than the required 10,000 park value, so we handily beat Puke Park as well. Now it will be guest goals all the way to the end, but while we have done a bunch of them without too many problems, that doesn't necessarily mean the others are going to be smooth sailing. First we get to White Water Park, which requires us to get 900 guests in 3 years. We start by firing all the staff, and we also get rid of all the guests so that we can remove all the path. Well, all the path pieces except these 2 pieces, as there is a puddle of puke that's on either one of these, I'm not sure which, but that means I'm not allowed to delete them as that will be doing a handyman's job. Since there is a bunch of water in this park, I want to go back to the boat hire strategy and therefore back to underground paths, as otherwise seasick guests will vomit everywhere. There is already a boat hire there, but it's rather big and since it has bumper boats it can break down. To prevent that I altered it and changed the boats to rowing boats so that it fits in with the others. Something I forgot in Leafy Lake is that with the underground paths we can also put down drink stalls, making this the very first scenario where we allow the guests to hydrate themselves. Now, as I thought would happen, in year 2 the guest count stagnates and we don't even have 700 of them at the end of it, making me quite skeptical about our abilities to hit 900 after another year. But I came prepared, and while you weren't looking I already built an entire array of inverted swinging ships. These have a little over 4 intensity, making them perfect for everyone, except fairly unhappy people with a preference of under 3, but that preference occurs in only 1 in 8 guests and they already have the boat hires anyway. Unlike the boat hires, these can break down, which is why I'm only opening them now with just 1 year to go instead of at the start with 3 years to go. I quite like the swinging inverter ship because it has a good intensity rating for almost everyone and it also lets guests off when it breaks down instead of freezing and holding them hostage forever. This prevents any park rating issues from people being stuck and getting angry like we had in Forest Frontiers. This works amazingly well and the guest count is now shooting up again, as while previously only 25% of the guests could stay around, now 100% can stay around. At the end of the year we have about 1200 guests, nearly double what we had a year earlier and easily enough to beat the scenario. For Millennium Mines I decided to go all in on this swinging inverter ship strategy. First I made some money by luring people to an empty park with just a single path piece, and at the start of year 3 I opened some of the ships that I built. Not all of them, as this way we can save some for later so that fewer will be broken down close to the deadline. The goal is 800 guests after 3 years, so we have 1 year left to get those guests. Since almost all the guests will be willing to ride these inverted ships, the guest count increases very quickly and in less than half a year we get over 700 guests in the park. Then, at the start of July, we open the other half and get even more guests. In fact, there are so many of them that overcrowding is starting to become a real issue, so it's time to build some random paths to spread out the guests some more. This works wonders, and when it's nearly the end of year 3, the park rating is back up to nearly 999 and the guest count has exceeded 1200, over 50% more than necessary. Up next is Carts and Coasters, which has a goal of 1000 guests in 3 years. That seems easy, as we just did 1200 guests in just 1 year, but it definitely wasn't. One issue is that there's far less open space here to build an array of rides, as there are other rides in the way. That does bring us to a bit of a dilemma though. Am I allowed to remove these rides? Earlier I said I wasn't, because removing and replacing rides imitates the job of a mechanic inspecting or fixing it. That makes sense, but these rides are not broken, and I'm also not planning to replace them with the same ride. Instead I'm going to build something completely different. That's not really doing a mechanic's job in any way, is it? Whatever your answer to this dilemma is, I decided to keep the rides around because it adds a bit of an extra challenge. After having removed all the guests and all the path that doesn't have puke on it, we start making money in the same way that we did in Millennium Mines, but it's not quite as effective as the park rating tends to be quite a bit lower, which leads to a lower guest spawning rate. Maybe that's because of the lower happiness. In Millennium Mines, the average happiness of a newly spawned guest is 62% of the maximum, while in Cars and Coasters it's just 54%. We do still make a decent amount though, and in June year 2 with nearly 50k in the bank we start building some swinging inverted ships. It's a bit tricky to find the space, but behind the go-karts we can fit a few. Usually these carts and coasters wouldn't be a problem, but since the path has to be underground while the rides cannot be underground, we can't just build everything on top of the go-karts. After those first 6 ships have been opened and the guests are flowing in, I'm starting to look for more places to build more ships, as we will need a lot more of them to get to 1000 guests. One advantage of these disconnected ride areas will be that it automatically leads to there being more paths, making the guests more spread out and thus preventing overcrowding. When this area was done, I noticed that the park rating was very low, which is weird, so I decided to investigate, and it turns out that I somehow failed to connect the entrance to the ship on both sides, getting all the guests stuck, unable to reach the rides. I solved that, and while building the third and so far biggest ship area, the park rating recovers quickly. Just like in the previous scenario, I will open these in batches so that they won't all be broken down a year from now. I started a bit earlier than last time just in case, which results in us already having 500 guests in the park when the final year starts. In year 3 I'm building even more rides in yet another area of the park, as I found a nice big bit of land with lots of space for lots of rides. The guest influx is slowing down a bit, but we are still at about 840 guests halfway year 3, so things are looking good. However, right after this the guest count completely stagnates, and I figure that might be because our soft guest cap is not high enough. Every ride attracts a certain number of guests to the park, and swinging inverter ships are quite bad for this, with actually just 35, fairly low for a flat ride. Broken down rides don't count, so as more and more ships break down, the soft guest cap also goes down. To solve this, I spammed some random spiral slides in the forest, and soon after the guest count started increasing again. But then it again stagnated at about 940, and this time it was caused by guests heading for the go-karts, not finding it and all getting stuck in the same place, getting unhappy from overcrowding and leaving. I had accidentally opened the carts when I used the open all button to open the final batch of ships, and this is now a problem. The obvious solution is closing it again, and after the final few unhappy guests have left, the count goes up again, and eventually at the end of year 3 we get to about 1150 guests. That is enough, as we only need 1000, but it's a very good thing that we started halfway year 2 with getting guests instead of only at the start of year 3, we really did need that extra time. In Mel's world I'm going to try to get by with only mazes again. The goal is 1200 guests in 3 years, which is quite a lot, but there is a specific reason why I think we can do it this way this time. And if not, we always have the option of building some more intense rides near the end, and we can even advertise if all other options are out. As usual, we first get all the guests out, and what I noticed is that this scenario starts with quite a lot of puke already there. Well, it was only 8 at the start, but we very quickly got another 11 puddles during the guest purge for a grand total of 19, permanently subtracting 76 from our park rating. That will result in fewer guest spawns until we get the rating very high, but it's just something we gotta deal with. Then it's time to start flattening some of the ground so that we can build our massive arrays of mazes there. Like before, these only have 0.5 intensity, so only guests with a low intensity preference will want to ride them. Those are the 12.5% that spawn with a preference of 3 or less, the 12.5% that want 1 to 4, and this time also the 12.5% that want 2 to 5. You see, the happier a guest is, the further they are willing to stray outside of that range. For a guest with a minimum of 2 intensity to ride the maze with just 0.5, they need at least 150 happiness. The maximum happiness is 255, so they need a little over half of that. In both Evergreen Gardens and Bumbly Bazaar, guests spawn with 50% happiness and a small random factor in either direction, resulting in a minimum of 112 and a maximum of 143, which is too low for this maze. But in Mel's world, guests spawn with 68%, which is 158 minimum and 189 maximum, which is enough to make the guests with a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 5 ride the 0.5 intensity maze. That also explains why we did so well in Trinity Islands. There, guests get 62% happiness, and that is enough for about 3/4 of the 2 to 5 crowd to be happy enough for a maze. And when they ride a maze, they get more happiness after it, so they will definitely do want to go on it again. At the start of May, we have a decent amount of mazes and a little over 100 guests in the park, but we also did get the award for most disappointing park. Yeah, sorry, it's not my fault that the 50% of the guests that spawn with a preference of over 4 intensity are getting unhappy because they can't find a suitable ride but also haven't left yet, dragging down the park rating. A negative award penalizes your guest spawning rate by 25%, so this is a genuine setback. As a result, we only have 180 guests at the end of June, which is less than the 200 we need every 4 months to be on schedule. We did start a bit later than March 1st though, as we first had to get all the guests out, and the award also expires after September. This makes the second half of the first year better, and now we have about 450 guests with 2 years to go. Suddenly, I got an idea. Why not build a few big mazes with the maximum intensity possible? A maze gets 0.02 extra intensity per tile up to 100 tiles, which is a maximum of 2 extra intensity points. That gives it 2.5 intensity, which is even enough for the massive 4 or more crowd. Except there's a problem, as this maze doesn't get 2.5 intensity and instead just gets exactly 1. What happened? Did it work differently in RCT1 than RCT2? Nope, it turns out this is another open RCT2 bug that has gone unnoticed for many years. In reality, it's not the size times 2 that the intensity gets, but the size divided by 2, making the maximum boost just half a point instead of 2 points. This too is now fixed in the development version of OpenRCT 2 and will also be in the next release version, but it does mean that unfortunately my maze runs in my Fastest Millionaire video are invalid. Well, they're still valid in the version of OpenRCT 2 I used for it, but according to how the game is supposed to work and how OpenRCT 2 works right now, my strategy there doesn't work. I relied there on thrill seekers still wanting to ride a 2.5 intensity maze when they're happy enough, but a 1.00 intensity maze is always too low for guests that prefer 4 or more, no matter what. Any strategies that involve tiny mazes are luckily unchanged, as the intensity of the one-tile death maze used to be 0.52 in OpenRCT 2 and is now the correct 0.50, which is pretty much the exact same. Okay, so that doesn't work, but we're still doing quite alright. At the end of year 2 we have 118 mazes and are well ahead of schedule with 950 guests. Something we do have to look out for is overcrowding, as the guests are not spaced out very equally. Especially the backsides of these maze arrays are crowded, as that's where everyone eventually ends up, so I added a bunch of no entry signs to get people out of there as quickly as possible. In the third year I also built a bunch of extra paths to give people even more space and prevent overcrowding even harder. This works well enough, and it turns out that year 3 is even our most productive yet. In the first year we got 450 guests in the park, in the second year an extra 500 and in this year about 520 for a total of about 1470 guests. That's certainly not bad and well over the requirements to beat this scenario. Up next is Mystic Mountain, for which I plan to employ a new strategy. During a livestream where I played Blackpool Pleasure Beach, I noticed that this roller coaster has a super low excitement and nausea rating, but still quite a high intensity. This is rather odd, but it turns out that in RCT1 the wooden coaster only gets its excitement and nausea penalized when it gets a stat penalty and not the intensity. That is very strange and I've never seen that before, but it's also very useful as it allows us to make this design. It has every stat penalty it can get, resulting in 0.11 excitement, 3.22 intensity and just 0.07 nausea. The excitement doesn't matter, the intensity is perfect for everyone that isn't super unhappy, and the near zero nausea means we don't have to bother with underground paths to prevent vomit, as no one will ever get sick from this ride. It is rather large in footprint compared to the rides we've used before, and it will eventually break down, but I think it will still work fine. After we waited for 2 years, we still have 1 year left to get the required 800 guests. Like we did with the inverted ships before, I'm going to build and open these in several batches so that they won't all be broken down at the end of the year, and also because I don't have enough money to immediately build all of them. After opening the first 8 of these, we get screwed over significantly by rain. This scenario has the cool and wet climate, which means a lot of rain, especially in April. Still though, there is only a 33% chance of rain whenever the weather changes in April, and in March even only 28%, yet we got a lot more rain than that. When it's raining, guests are not going on the ride, which means they don't get the happiness from it, and that in turn keeps the park rating low, resulting in fewer guests spawning. That makes for a bit of a rough start, but when the rain has stopped and the rating has increased, the guest spawning has become fast enough for us to have about 465 guests when July starts. That's halfway the year and we're well over halfway to 800 guests, so things are looking fine. The last 4 months are not particularly special. I built a few more rides, a bunch of early ones broke down, and I built some extra pods on top of the coasters to prevent overcrowding from happening. The increase of the guest count does slow down a bit near the end, but that's still enough to get us to nearly 900 guests, beating Mystic Mountain. We have now arrived at the second desert scenario, Pacific Pyramids. To pay homage to the name, I'm going to fill it with as many pyramids as I can. Just pyramids won't get us any guests though, so I should probably also build some rides. But where? Well, how about inside the pyramids? Yeah, that's right, there's a hollow space inside of the biggest scenery item in RollerCoaster Tycoon, and it's just big enough to fit a couple of different ride types. There could be some that I have missed, but keeping in mind that you also need some space to build the paths, in RCT1 you can build a maze, motion simulator, go-karts and a few tiny coaster designs inside. For this run I decided to go with the go-karts as I haven't used it yet and it has a much lower nausea than the motion simulator. This design with 5 laps has an intensity rating of 2.88 that everyone can enjoy and a nausea of just 0.43, which I think is low enough to prevent any vomit on the 2 tiles right outside of the exit that are not underground. Of course, the downside of the go-karts is that they can break down, but we don't get the maze anyway, so if we want to do pyramids, we will have to do breakable rides. Instead of waiting for a while, as we've done before when using breakable rides, I'm going to start immediately. The 4-year goal deadline means that any rides we build right now will almost certainly be broken down at the end, but that's okay with me, we can just build more. And now the process is quite simple, we just keep building more and more pyramid cart units until the 4 years are over, and hopefully we have over the required 1000 guests by then. At the end of the first year we have 14 pyramid carts, but the guest count is completely stagnating. It took me a little bit to figure out why, and the reason turns out to be that the park entrance is too expensive. I have been charging for the entry and not the rides in every scenario, and since guests spawn with 65 to 95 euros here, I'm charging 50. But too many carts have broken down by now, and the remaining ones do not add up to a 50 euro park entry fee anymore. No problem, we just built more rides to deal with that and keep this in mind for the rest of the scenario. While we only need a certain amount of working rides to keep up the 50 euro entry fee, the soft guest cap will need to get higher and higher over time. I have already given every pyramid an ice cream stall and a toilet which attract 20 guests together, but I want some more to be safe. So I'm going to build a big fat line of balloon stalls on this empty strip we have left over. Every balloon stall attracts 15 guests to the park, so a few dozen will attract more than 500, making sure we never hit the soft guest cap. After that was done, all I had to do was build a new line of pyramids every few months, and in October year 3 we already have about 1200 guests, more than we need for the goal, and we still have a year to go. I will continue to build more and more pyramids in this year because old ones are still breaking down. The original park is pretty full by now, but there is loads of land available, so we can still expand more. In the end, we have an array of 8x9 pyramids for a total of 72. Most of the go-karts have been broken down, but enough are still working that we got to over 1600 guests, a new record for this video, and of course enough to comfortably beat this scenario. Crumbly Woods is interesting because it's quite similar to Mel's World. Obviously the park looks quite different, but the goal of 1200 guests in 3 years is the same, and so is the initial loan, the maximum loan and the initial guest cash happiness, hunger and thirst. That same 68% initial guest happiness means that mazes will work very well here too, so that's what I'm going to do. There's quite a lot of space here, so we can build a lot of mazes. The run itself isn't very special and mostly just very similar to Mel's World. One nice thing about these maze runs is that nothing really can go wrong. The mazes don't ever break down and there is no possibility of vomit and also not of litter if you build the correct food stall, so it's very reliable. One factor that is random is which awards you get, and I'm guessing that I had quite a bit of good luck here as we end up with about 1630 guests when we beat it. That's about 160 more than in Mel's World and even a few more than our old record in the previous scenario, Pacific Pyramids, and that was a 4-year scenario instead of just 3. 16 scenarios down, just 5 to go, and Paradise Pier provides a unique challenge. Here you don't own any land, just some construction rights over water. You can build directly on the water, but since you cannot alter the land, you cannot build your paths underground and prevent vomit that way. Seems like the maze is the obvious solution, but you don't get it here. That means we will need to work with rides that can break down, as the boat hire isn't an option because of vomit, and my ride of choice is this chairlift that doesn't lift you anywhere. It just goes around the station and that's it. This gives it 0.00 excitement as it has a unique stat requirement of 2 stations, and when you don't do that it doesn't get its stats divided like all the other rides, but rather just gets its excitement set to 0. That is a cool fact, but it also doesn't matter. What does matter is that it has a nausea low enough so that no one will vomit, and it's also quite small with just 6 tiles. That means we can place quite a lot of them. We can start building quite early as Paradise Pier has just a 2-year goal that has a requirement of 600 guests. A question you might have is why I built these raised paths around the edges. Well, that's the height stalls appear at, so you cannot connect them to the lower paths. In fact, any ride that you build from scratch appears at this height in this scenario, as that's what the original height of the pier was at, which is done to make it easier for you as the shift functionality doesn't exist yet in this game. The chairlift I'm using is a saved design though, which does appear directly on the water, which is the reason the main park is low down. Another thing is that this chairlift is terrible. In June year 2 we still only have a bit over 300 guests. I think it's mainly because of the terrible throughput, so a lot of guests who do want to ride this ride cannot do so because there's just not enough capacity. This is evidenced by seeing that there are indeed guests with a less than 3 intensity preference who are leaving because they haven't been able to ride a ride quickly enough. The combination of no queue line and not making it wait for full load was a mistake. I did a test and just enabling the wait makes the throughput go from a maximum of 96 per hour to double that with 192 guests per hour. Guests board these rides in pairs, so when one guest heads inside they have to wait for another one to join them before they can actually board. If the rides wait for full load, then the entrance is free for anyone to walk into, but if it doesn't, it will eject the singular guest again, once again clogging up the singular queue spot that rides without a queue line have. I could also have increased the speed of the chairlift, as it currently is at the lowest possible of 3 km per hour, but I did that on purpose because higher speeds lose reliability quicker and therefore break down quicker, which is also not great. All this means that we will not get enough guests. I could redo it with the ride waiting for a full load, which would most likely work, but instead I will use the same strategy as in Dynamite Dunes and plop down a no entry sign. I placed it down a little bit earlier on October 12th as we had some wiggle room last time. It's gonna be a tight squeeze, but we do beat Paradise Pier with 639 park rating and 641 guests, both just over the required 600. And it really was tight, as just 16 seconds later the park rating drops below 600 as people are starting to get lost. Okay, I couldn't resist trying it again, with the only difference in strategy being that the chairlifts now all wait for full load. The difference in outcome isn't massive, but still quite significant, as this time we do beat Paradise Pier without the need for a no entry sign. In the first run we got to 641 guests, of which quite a few dozen only stayed around because they got trapped. But this time around we beat that with 663 guests that are all here because they want to be. That just shows the impact that one tiny little option can have on how well your park performs, and it's worth paying attention to that. Next up is lightning peaks. Originally I had the mad idea to try to lower all the land before the 3-year deadline was up, but a quick experiment in OpenRCT2 showed me that would cost 1.1 million euros, which is never ever gonna happen. Okay, so mazes it is then. A few of them fit downstairs, but then we go up and it's on top of the hill where I'm going to place down most of them. Even now, most of our money is still going to altering the land, as the mazes are incredibly cheap at 27 euros a pop. We reached the required 900 guests in March year 3, so all seems well, but that's not quite true. In April we so very briefly hit 1000 guests, but after that it goes downhill again and we lose a lot of guests. We even go significantly below 900 again, which potentially could be a problem. We still have a few months to do something about this, but I'm curious whether this will just solve itself. And it looks like it will, as after we get the Safest Park award at the start of July, the guest count starts going up again. And this time it even goes past 1000 in October, so we didn't have to do anything extra to complete the goal. We're on to the final 3 scenarios now, and it's over. I mean, just look at this. Ivory Tower starts with loads and loads of puke and litter everywhere. We are not allowed to remove this, and with the maximum litter penalty of 600 it is impossible to get the park rating high enough to beat it, even if all the other sources are somehow maxed out. That makes Ivory Towers unbeatable if the jobs of staff are not allowed to be done. Or is it? Believe it or not, I do actually have a plan that just might work. What we do is we herd everyone to the front of the park and trap them there. Then we start advertising to get more guests trapped there. Yes, we do need advertising for this strategy, but that was never banned, that was just an extra fun challenge I wanted to try for as many scenarios as I could. And we just continue to advertise and advertise and advertise. After a year we have over 2600 guests in the park, which is easily enough for the 1000 guest goal, but they're all sad and want to go home, so the park rating is never going to be high enough. But have faith in me, trust the process. In August year 2 we hit 4,235 guests and suddenly we get no more new ones despite the ads still running. That is because we have hit the entity limit of 4,601. The guests, litter, ride vehicles and ducks all combine to that number, which means we cannot get any more entities. The park rating is still 0 and that proves that unfortunately you can indeed not beat Ivory Towers without staff. In RollerCoaster Tycoon 1. I used OpenRCT2 to convert this from an SV4 file to an SV6 file so that now I can open it in RollerCoaster Tycoon 2 and continue the run there. Interestingly, this game can handle the RCT1 setting where you're able to charge for both the park entrance and the ride tickets at the same time just fine, even though that option doesn't exist in RCT2. It doesn't quite work the same as the ride ticket price is grayed out and I can only lower it and not raise it, but the game at least doesn't crash. One thing it cannot do is render whatever is to the left of the entrance area, as whenever I drag the screen over there, the game does crash. I bet it's the steep track of the steel mini coaster, as the RCT2 variant of this track type, which is the junior coaster, doesn't have steep track pieces. Anyway, the reason I switched to RCT2 is that it has a much higher entity limit of 9,601 instead of just 4,601. Now we can continue to get more guests, and that is important. A bit later we're at 5,000 guests, and it's about to happen. Look at the park rating, look at it, and there it is, 999 park rating! We have now officially fulfilled the goal requirements without any staff. Soon after that it does go back to 0, and as we're still getting more guests it will jump back and forth between the two a bit until it eventually is permanently stuck at 999. Why and how on earth does this work? To show you, we'll open the RCT1 version of this park in OpenRCT2 and use Bossy's Park Rating Inspector plugin to analyze it. We get a little bit of rating from a variety of sources and then lose 600 from all the litter and about 27,000 from lost guests. That is because every single lost guest, which is nearly all of the guests in the park, gives -7 and there's no ceiling on this penalty. After this calculation, the minus 27,000 just gets rounded to the minimum rating of 0 though, so this doesn't really do anything. But now watch that number in the RCT2 version with 5,000 guests. It is even lower now and even goes as low as minus 32,768. That number is significant as that is the minimum value that the signed 16-bit integer can store. Any lower than that and it will loop all the way back around to the maximum of 32,767, and that's exactly what's happening here. Well, not in OpenRCT2 as it fixed that, but in the original vanilla RCT2 that is what's happening, and that's why the park rating is suddenly going up to 999. This number fluctuates a bit as sometimes guests don't count as lost for a little while, which is the reason why it went back to 0 a number of times. But once you have enough trapped guests, your park rating will permanently be low enough to wrap around to 32,000 and then be capped at 999. At the end of year 3 we beat Ivory Towers with 5,716 guests and the perfect 999 park rating. It unfortunately wasn't quite possible in RCT1, making this technically a fail, but beating Ivory Towers in RCT2 instead is still close enough that it's at least half a pass, right? Well, that's only if we can beat the final 2 scenarios of course. Up next is Rainbow Valley, and this provides again a unique challenge. It looks fairly standard with a goal of 1,000 guests in 4 years, but you are not allowed to remove any trees and you're also not allowed to change the terrain. That is gonna destroy pretty much all the strategies we have used so far. Mazes could probably work, they would be all over the place instead of in a neat array, but I think it would work, except we don't get the maze here. We do get a load of other ride types that we've used before, like the spiral slide, boat hire and inverted swinging ship, but they all give puke and need underground paths, which isn't gonna work. You cannot place flat rides underground in RCT1, and since we cannot alter the terrain, there's only a couple of spots in this where we could potentially build a spiral slide or something that connects to underground paths. While you can technically build roller coasters entirely underground, you have to start it from above ground and then go underground, and doing that for every single ride we build is going to be super annoying, so the wooden roller coaster is also not an option. Because that all isn't possible, I came up with a new strategy, the guest trap. In my videos I have used guest traps for a variety of challenges, but they usually rely on entertainers to keep the guests happy. There is one trap that doesn't use them, which is the queue line trap, but that requires queue line TVs if you're not using entertainers, and TVs don't exist yet in RCT1. Despite that, I do think we can make it work. The most important thing is that the guests go on at least one ride before they are trapped to prevent them going home for not having ridden any. We could use a ride that allows everyone to get more guests, but that will break down and be annoying, so instead I'm going to use a boat hire. The 0.7 nausea did make guests puke in Leafy Lake, but that's only after riding it multiple times, just once will be fine. After that they go on a long exit path that leads them to this place, a corner office with a no entry sign and 2 adjacent stalls. Now that guests have ridden a ride, we need to make sure they are never too unhappy, tired or broke, because those things can make them want to leave. Tiredness is solved by having a food stall available, as guests only lose energy when they're very hungry and they're rich enough to not become even close to broke before the deadline. That then only leaves happiness as a potential problem. There is a variety of factors that can increase and decrease happiness, but the most important now is that they lose happiness if they are hungry, thirsty or toilety. That means we need 3 stalls, but there's only space for 2 here. You see, you also cannot place stalls underground in RCT1, but the path does need to be underground to prevent drink stall trash, so these corner cliffs with 2 stall spaces are the best we can do. We'll just have to switch the drink stall for a toilet and back to a drink stall every now and then. Okay, that's fairly straightforward, so let's run it and see how it goes. To attract guests and increase the maximum park entry fee, we'll just build a bunch of spiral slides. They'll break down eventually, but there's loads of space for new ones, so that'll be fine. It's going quite well, and in August we already have over 200 guests in the park, but there's a little bit of a problem. Well, I'm not sure if it's actually a problem, but there is a lot of overcrowding on these 2 tiles before the queue line. I can change it to just a single tile to prevent that, as guests only check for overcrowding when moving onto a different tile, but then guests start bugging out a bit and enter the queue line without actually queuing for the ride. This is fine though, it looks a bit weird, but it's not interfering with guests that are actually properly queuing, so this does work. In March of the 2nd year we have well over 300 guests, and I decided to switch to boat hires to attract guests to the park. As we get more and more guests, we need more and more opened rides to attract them all. The reason I chose spiral slides is that these boat hires won't ever get their stats tested, so they won't increase the entry fee, but they will still attract guests, so we can just have a few slides for the entry fee and then a whole load of unbreakable boat hires for the guests. I did make a bit of a mistake though, which is building a few of these close to where the guests are trapped. This makes a bunch of them head for boat hire 14, and when they cannot find it, they lose some happiness. Once it drops below 50%, they no longer count as happy, and that impacts the park rating. That rating is already decreasing, so it's time to remove these ones next to the trap, and after that the rating quickly recovers back to about 900. At the end of year 2, which is halfway to the deadline, we are way ahead of schedule with already over 700 guests in the park. Year 3 is rather uneventful, but we do pass the goal requirements and have over 1300 guests at the end of it. In April of year 4 I noticed that the park rating started slipping again, and much more significantly than the last time. In May it has even already dropped below 700 and it's probably only going to go down even more. It took me a while to figure out the issue this time. We do have a couple of trapped guests that want to go home, but those few don't penalize the park rating, so they aren't it. No, it is the average guest happiness, which we did mention before, that is the problem here. The guest happiness always tends towards the middle value of 127, but they aren't counted as happy for the park rating until they reach 129. Those are the exact values for it in OpenRCT2, and it could maybe be 1 different in RCT1, but this is the phenomenon that is causing the issue. Guests do gain happiness from buying food or drink or from using the toilet, but maybe they don't do it often enough to counteract this natural decrease. I tried to solve this issue by building a load of scenery and a merry-go-round to make them think the scenery or music is nice, which also gives them a happiness boost, but they didn't think that, perhaps because they're underground. Side note, I cannot ever remove these fountains because the game determines whether something is a tree by purely looking at how tall the object is, so these fountains are trees according to the game. What ultimately solved the issue was switching from the drink stall to the bathroom, as apparently I wasn't doing that frequently enough and these guests all did need to pee and they gained 30 happiness from using the bathroom, instantly making the park rating shoot back up to 955. A little bit later, in September, it happens again, and once again, the bathroom is the solution. We're also stuck at 1389 guests because in my attempt to recover the park rating the first time, I closed the park in order to eject any possible unhappy guests that hadn't ridden a boat hire, and since we're well past the goal already, I didn't bother to reopen the park. This shows that while you can make these guest traps work without staff, most importantly without entertainers, it is a bit more difficult, especially when you cannot build a food stall, drink stall and toilet at the same time. On to the final scenario, Thunder Rock. Here I'm going to do what we couldn't properly do in Rainbow Valley and make big use of the existing cliffs. I will build a path all the way around through the edge of the mountain so that this time we have plenty of space to connect outdoor rides to indoor path. It takes a lot of researching, but on September 22nd we finally get the very last gentle ride, which is the boat hire. Yeah, there is no separate water ride research in RCT1, they're either gentle or thrill rides. Now we can place the boat hires all the way around and hope that that is enough to get 900 guests in 4 years. Well, I say hope, but given our experience with previous scenarios, it shouldn't be a problem. And indeed, it isn't. At the start of year 3 the setup is finished and we already have about 700 guests in the park. This goes up rather quickly and just 2 months later we already hit the goal of 900 guests. In the final year the guest count does stagnate, as it seems we have hit the natural maximum for this park, but since it never drops below 1100 guests, it is easily enough. At the end of October year 4 we have a little over 1200 guests and we beat the final scenario. And with that we have, with one exception, beaten every single scenario in RollerCoaster Tycoon 1 without using staff or manually doing the jobs that staff members do, and also without advertising. Some were fairly easy, while others did require very specific strategies and a significant amount of micro. The one that couldn't be done in RCT1 itself is Ivory Towers, but that's only because the entity limit is not high enough, and in RCT2 it is possible, as there you can get enough guests to underflow the park rating. I learned quite a lot during this challenge and even found and fixed 2 bugs in OpenRCT2, which is great too. Let me know if you'd like me to use RCT1 for more videos and I'll see what I can do. To see my previous RCT1 challenge where I wasn't allowed to build any paths, click right here. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.